the Talk Shop Podcast Season 2, Episode 4, with my guest, Mark Simon. Welcome back to the Talk Shop Podcast, and before we get into it, we will be talking with my good friend, Mr. Mark Simon, the godfather of storyboard writing and director. We go over Mark's process on how he creates storyboards for shows like The Walking Dead, Snowfall, Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Amazon, and plenty more. He also talks about his love for comic books and how that's really inspired him, as well as how he keeps inspired so that he can keep bringing fresh new ideas towards his work. We touch a bit on AI and how it's affecting that part of the industry, as well as his directorial experience and advice for actors when directing them. Welcome back to the Talk Shop Podcast, and today I have with me Mr. Mark Simon, the godfather of storyboards. How's it going?
Going great. Glad to be on here with you, Richie.
Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to do this. It's really cool too, because I just started working on my LinkedIn, and I was looking around, and I saw you, and I messaged you. I was like, "Hey, do you cast for this?" You're like, "I don't cast." And then I looked, I was like, "He's a storyboard artist for like all these great titles, like The Walking Dead, some stuff that I grew up with, like Dragon Tales." And I was like, you know what? I gotta interview this guy. So, and I was like, let me just ask him and see. And you said yes, so thank you.
Absolutely. It's funny you bring up Dragon Tales. Man, that was a while ago. Yeah, That was fun.
Yeah. So let's start with, what is it that you do specifically?
So as a storyboard artist, I illustrate the director's vision of a script, which becomes like a blueprint for the crew to follow. Because if you think about it, like when you read a book or a script, and I read a book or a script, we're going to have different images in your head.
Right.
But we have anywhere from 200 to 700 crew members on a show at any one time.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to be efficient is if everyone is working towards the same vision, which is the director's vision. And we help them determine what that vision is as the artist. But we work with the director and break it down, and then everyone then has answers to questions and comes up with questions, and they can properly budget and schedule that there is no way they could do without knowing what the director wants to see.
Right, that definitely makes sense. So basically, it's getting a plan of action together, so everyone's not like, well, we should do this, we should do that, we should do, and then nothing gets done.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if someone says, build me a 3-bedroom house, what's it going to look like? Where are the rooms? Is it going to be really fancy? Is it going to be really small? You know, there's 1,000 questions you would have. Well, the same thing when you read about, Billy jumps in through the door and trips into a glass table. There's so many different ways that could happen. What's he tripping over? Is it a cat? Is it jumping on his face? Is someone throwing him or shooting him? All those different things. And while I would make an assumption, the director's idea may be completely different. So rather than have people assume, they just follow my storyboards and everyone knows exactly what to do.
Got it. So you map out what's essentially going to happen. That way, everybody has not just a foundation, but a route to work with, and then adjust from there as needed.
Yeah, and it's a lot like a comic book. It's not laid out like comic book pages, but they're illustrated kind of like comic books with detailed descriptions of even what lens we're going to shoot with, or what the visual effect is, and are we shooting a piece on location or on set, or is it a split screen? All those things go into the notes of my storyboards when I'm drawing them.
That's awesome. So that's really cool. So let's talk about some of the projects you worked on and really what goes into that. The Walking Dead, that's a big favorite because probably people are listening. I was like, I watched The Walking Dead. You're one of the people who has definitely contributed work to this long-running franchise. What was it like to get some of these scenes together, and what was the process and tools that you used in order to get these scenes routed and mapped out for people to then go with?
A lot of it depends on what it is that we're doing. And look, that's a super fun show. It was one of my goals when I moved to Atlanta, was to work on The Walking Dead. And I've now worked on 5 of the various shows in The Walking Dead universe. So nice. It's been 9 seasons. I've been working on various Walking Dead shows. So it's been a blast. There are times when I just sit with a director and they just describe what they want to see, shot by shot. There are other times, like working with Greg Nicotero, the executive producer. He also designs all the makeup effects, and he directs a lot of them. Mm-hmm. There was one big battle sequence at the end of one of our seasons. I think it was the end of season 9. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to look like a battle scene, so we watched battle movies together.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so, and he would point out, see how this is in the foreground and the background, all that kind of action going on. I want to get that kind of feel. So, we would look at reference materials to kind of get into the type of visual look that he wants. Sometimes we use still photos. Season 10 of Walking Dead, everyone wanted to be kind of Western, David Lean Western looking,
Hmm.
really wide expanse vistas and things like that. That helps kind of dictate what it's going to be. And then I often, because we have a different director every episode on these
Hmm.
big hour-long shows, I generally, if I haven't worked with the director before, when I find out who the next director is, I watch some of the recent stuff to get a feel for how they like to shoot. Do they move the camera around a lot? Do they center people? Do they put them off on the side? Is it canted? How do they like to shoot? And so I try to really study their visual storytelling style so that I'm kind of prepared to illustrate what would be closer to what they see in their head.
Hmm.
Some directors sketch out ideas. Some directors take photos, reference photos of locations. Sometimes I'll walk a location with a director. I love doing that. We walk through the sets or locations, and we'll step through and we'll figure out the action together. We'll
Hmm.
literally act it out with a couple PAs, and I'll use that to then draw from. When I was on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we were shooting a couple of our episodes in Italy, so I was flown to Italy for 2 weeks and around Lake Como, and I was going to all the locations and mapping everything out with the director. Overhead maps and photos. It was literally everything. And we went through everything together over and over and over for these complicated chase scenes that then I illustrated out in complete motion and audio and everything. So everyone really got a good feel for how it's going to come. And that's one of the things I love about what I do.
Hmm.
It's never the same. Every project is different. Every director is different. Every story and script is different. So I don't get bored. I get to draw and tell great stories with different creative people every day. It's awesome.
That sounds awesome. So, and like you mentioned, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you even did the storyboards for like chase scenes. That right there sounds very interesting and also very complex because they're literally moving right there, and in Italy no less. So,
Yeah.
and that's awesome to hear. It's like everything's different, everything's new, every single project. So this is a form of storytelling, especially like, literally is. What is it that got you interested in wanting to do storyboards to begin with?
Well, when I first moved out to Hollywood, right after I graduated from college, I moved out to LA,
Mm-hmm.
and I had built homes growing up, custom homes. So I knew how to design, I knew how to swing a hammer, I knew how to run crews. So I kind of figured the art department was my way into the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and it was. I started working at Roger Corman's studio right away, on a classic movie called Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a classic. So I got hired as the construction coordinator
Mm-hmm.
to oversee the design and building of all the sets and all the visual effects on the show, on the movie. And 2 weeks in, I became the art director.
Right.
So, and I just went on for years as art directing and production designing on commercials and music videos and movies. And then my wife and I moved to Orlando, and we opened up Nickelodeon. She became a production manager and producer at Nick when it went national, and I became the second designer at Nickelodeon and for all their live action productions. So in all these years of of art directing, was great. I loved doing it, but I wasn't drawing as much. And
Mm-hmm.
and I am an illustrator at heart. I've always been an illustrator. I was a syndicated cartoonist for a while. I was an editorial cartoonist. I designed marketing, and I did comic books for clients. I did all sorts of just illustrating in every way. As a designer, I was designing, not necessarily illustrating. And of course, working in movies and TV, I was seeing storyboards all the time. And I thought, I think I might want to move into that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was when I first had the idea, I was working at HBO
Mm-hmm.
on a series called First and Ten with O.J. Simpson, and I went to the executive producer and I said, look, I don't know if you need boards. You're paying for me anyway. I'm here. Let me do your storyboards if you ever need them. And
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks later, he called me and said, yeah, we need some storyboards for this horror comedy episode that's not working out. We'd like to see what you can do to make it better. And I fell in love instantly with doing it. Um, and I was probably doing everything wrong. I actually went to an agency and showed them some samples. It was called Storyboards Inc., and they said, no, everything I did was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, all right, well, show me some samples. What do I need to change? And they gave me some samples, and a week later I showed back up with new samples, and they sent me away with a couple other thoughts. And a week later I kept showing up, and they didn't ask me to, but I just showed up every week with new samples until they started placing me on commercials.
Right.
And so then I was doing back and forth between storyboarding and art directing. And when I was living in Orlando, I was working at Universal. That's where Nickelodeon was based.
Mm-hmm.
And Spielberg came into town with Sequest, the Roy
Mm-hmm.
Scheider futuristic submarine series. We used to call it Star Trek Underwater. And uh, I really wanted to work on that. It was the biggest budgeted show on TV at the time. Steven Spielberg, science fiction, Roy Scheider. What's not to love about this?
Mm-hmm.
So I just walked over with my portfolio into the offices and talked to everyone I could until I walked out with the job, and they hired me as a story artist. And I've been full-time storyboarding since then. That's when I changed my career, was working for Spielberg. That was it.
Nice.
Yeah, and I've never looked back. It's been 32 years full-time storyboarding now since that time.
Nice. And clearly you made a living at this, and
Oh, I make good living at it.
yeah, that's awesome. So you're working for Steven Spielberg at this point, Nickelodeon, which I mean I grew up with because I'm like in my 30s right now, and I completely remember growing up on those sitcoms, seeing those, and the set pieces. Like at the time, I wasn't studying acting compared to now. When then I go to
Mhm.
college, and I'm like, okay, cool, I want to study an actor because those were some of the things that pushed me into doing it. And I went from yay, I want to do sitcoms and things like that to actually taking the craft a lot more seriously. But seeing these, you've worked on these projects, and then you've even worked on cartoons and animated stuff. So what's the difference between back then and currently now? Some of the changing trends that have changed with the industry and things that have had to adapt, because we just went through COVID or in lockdowns.
Yeah, and the lockdown was rough. That was the longest break I'd ever had since I started working. And I'd been through a couple strikes, but COVID, everything. I was in the middle of Stranger Things when COVID hit. Um, and that really sucked because first of all, I'm a huge fan of the show. Here I am working on it, and they just shut everything down. March 15th, I got the call. Uh, and uh, but what's changed mostly is technology. I started before there were digital cameras or even computers that you could draw on. I was a paper based guy when we got started. What we can do now so much faster. I can deliver more faster and better than ever before. And I like to take advantage of new technologies. I really enjoy change and trying new things. In fact, I helped develop the leading software called Storyboard Pro, and that just it helps me to help production because I can give them so much. And when I'm drawing on a timeline, so I'm adding in scratch audio and adding motion and camera moves. So literally at any moment, I can hit play and the director can see their vision literally come to life. Instead of just looking at stills, they get a printout of the stills, but they can also see it moving. So they can see, is the humor working? Is the horror working? I tend to do a lot of horror projects. Is the edit coming together? And then there are times where I do post-viz storyboards. And what that is after you shoot something, we need to add visual effects or we need to go and do some reshoots and add a couple new shots in. So editorial will give me the video they've already cut together, and I storyboard the extra things either over the video or in between. And again, we just hit play. Will these new shots tell the story that we want them to tell, or will this effect help sell this even more? All of that I can do in this one software. So, the use of the software and being able to draw digitally on my monitor, those are things that have been absolutely incredible for the industry. And like I said, and I love it. Change does not scare me. Change excites me.
Nice. So speaking of change, we're currently sitting at, especially for actors and voice actors and the strike that just happened, one of the central focuses was AI.
Yep.
And companies definitely on screen and even off screen the voiceover industry was just buzzing with it, with things like Nava running around saying, "Hey, we need to talk about this."
Mhm.
What part has AI started to play, not just within the industry, but also in the work that you do? Is it helping? Is it not? Or are we not sure?
It's a mix because AI is a lot of things. People tend to think AI is creating images. Well, that's one small part of what AI does. AI also writes, which is scary for screenwriters and copywriters. Um, but AI also automatically removes backgrounds from images, which I use multiple times every day. When I'm pulling reference photos to draw from and things like that. I have an AI program that pulls the background out, so it makes it clear for me for what I'm drawing. Um, so yeah, I use it all the time. There are some AI programs that are being developed for storyboarding. They're nowhere near being able to be used on projects like I work on, but it is scary to see how quickly it's evolving. I don't really think it's going to take from the top story artist because someone still has to go through it and understand it. Someone still has to create everything, and the directors don't have time. That's why there's a crew. Directors can't do everything. Where AI image generation is starting to hurt things is production and prop illustrators, for doing logos or background concepts, things like that, or for directors who are doing pitch decks, whether it's storyboards or individual images on pitch decks. That's taking some work away, and I'm only saying some work because the directors who are willing to do that were using what we called photo boards anyway. They would either take photos or find photos rather than hiring a story artist. So I don't think that's that much taken away from us as a story artist, but we're all keeping our eyes on it. And our latest contract was just ratified. There was some stuff about AI in there. It was not strong enough, but I, we're all keeping a watchful eye on it. I wish it would have been stronger. It isn't. So now we just have to work with what we work with. And then what's going to happen, there's some projects are going to use AI more than they should have. They're going to fail miserably and it's going to go back. We're also going to find more and more of us are finding, oh, here's how I can use AI. Like I said, I use it for, pulling backgrounds out of things. So yeah, nothing's all good, nothing's all bad. But we do have to be careful that we don't eliminate the artists who created things in the first place. Because image generation in particular, all that does is steal from work that we've done in the past.
Right.
It's not creating anything new.
Mhm.
And it's very hard to capture a director's vision. Like you can create a cool image of a cat as a samurai.
Mhm.
But as soon as someone says, well, can you move the eye line over here a little bit or change that pose or lower the camera, AI falls apart. It can't do those small things. It generates a whole new image. So that's again where a seasoned person can make those quick changes. But it's also, I'm not just a hand that can draw.
Mhm.
I'm a person who knows how to visually tell a story, how to break down effects, how to put the information together in a way and know what's cutting properly, or how to make something funny, how to make something scary. Those are things that can't just be stolen from something else because it's all dependent upon this project and a director's vision and what they're going for. So I'm not worried about it, but I'm not casting a blind eye to it either.
Yeah. No, that's definitely very accurate with that. And because just recently they started reporting that AI is collapsing on itself because so many people who have been using AI generated art, that's where the AI itself is pulling from. So it's ending up with worse and worse products. And I looked at this, I was like, wow. So it's kind of biting itself in the tail at this point.
Well,
And
in more ways than one, because there's also a lot of a number of reports that are out there that people are turning away from the AI look, and so it's actually hurting companies that are using it. And because AI, like the search engines, Google and Bing, pretty much suck now. I mean, because we do Google searches all the time, for whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's reference images or whatever. A couple months ago, they changed how it searches, and because it's pulling from good and bad information across the web,
Mm-hmm.
almost half of the results are nonsense now. So it's no longer, hey, AI can fix everything. Now it's like AI is telling you to build a campfire inside the tent, which is a real thing that I saw. So it can't be believed, and the bigger companies wanted to use it until they realized, oh, wait a minute, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and SpongeBob are showing up perfectly
Hmm.
in Google search engines or image generation, and so now they're suing the AI company. So I think the wonderment and the hope is not going to actually happen the way people were hoping it would.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you got to be very careful because it's pulling from bad as well as good.
Got it. So that's just affecting everything. So it's like,
Yep.
oh, I thought this sounded like a good idea. Never mind. So when you work on a project and when you tell a story and you're looking, you mentioned, like you say, you're not just an artist. You you're also working with all kinds of people. Definitely seeing actors in action as well and figuring out where do they get placed in something.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that you look for to really communicate your stories to other people that will be watching or listening?
Other episodes of the show I'm working on, um, because you want a consistent look. So, if a show has a very specific way that they frame things, you can't go off of that. You need to be consistent. So you need to understand the visual look, whether it's animated or live action, of what you're working on. Um, but beyond that, every project's different. And we also do a lot of commercials. Like I'm working on a commercial today where when I read the description, it was one thing, and then all of a sudden the director said, "No, I want the camera down on the ground looking up at these people when they meet." Okay. Well, that's not something that just shows up in a script. That's the director's vision. And that's part of what I love. It's like, "Ooh, I hadn't thought about that. Cool. Yeah, let's draw it that way." But, a lot of it, I've worked on over 6,000 productions now. So when when I'm working with a director and we're trying to make this thing be funny or this thing be scary, I have a lot of things of inspiration over my career to pull from to try to make that work as good as possible. Or sometimes we'll throw, hey, did you see this? So I have to keep up with watching all the movies and TV shows and things that are popular on the web. Because if a director says, oh, I want to emulate this music video, or "Yeah, have you seen this show? We're going to do something that's kind of like what you would see there." So we're throwing back the things back and forth because most things are inspired by something else, and then you take it to a new level.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I get to write off my cable bill.
That's good.
It's a business expense.
Oh, perfect. So speaking of that, because we definitely talk about inspired things, and
Yeah.
especially for like just artists in general, like you mentioned, inspired things. I know that a lot of voice actors and actors in general, they're like, hey, I saw something from this actor, so I used it, and then after that, I mixed it with something else to do this. What are some instances that you have done that as well? Because you mentioned, hey, we sat there and watched movies on war scenes to see what we could get to put in. So, what were some of those things that really made it click? Like, oh, this will work.
Usually it's going to be something a director suggests because they're trying to emulate something that exists. Like that one Walking Dead episode that I had mentioned. That was a Spielberg movie about World War II that
Mm-hmm.
we sat and watched. Which I also learned that when you're studying visuals, turn off the audio
No.
because if it's a really good movie, you get wrapped up in the story, and now you're no longer paying attention. So I always turn off the audio just so I can just focus on the visuals. But believe it or not, comic books are a
Okay.
big thing. They're inspiring because of how they can visually show action. So I still read comics, and I have this great collection. There's a bunch of books here behind me. I have a little glass podium right there that I always have a different art book on top of. So every time when I walk to my desk, I walk past my art books and I flip a couple pages for visual inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether it's John Byrne illustration or if it's Frank Miller illustration, you know, different books of artists that I really admire. I look through their things, and it's not that I'm taking any one particular thing. It's just inspiring of seeing great art that
Mm-hmm.
when I sit down, I'm ready to rock and roll, and now I'm ready to create my own. I've been inspired by it. Um, Just like I'm sure you're inspired by watching certain actors, doesn't mean you're going to emulate that actor every time, but seeing a really good role just makes you hungry to do the same kind of quality in what you're doing. We get that as artists, and I put together a group of some of the top story artists around the world, and we get together and share samples with each other and talk and commiserate and tell stories, and all those things are part of the fun of doing this too.
That's nice. So you even have your own essentially tribe with you, which me as an artist have started. A lot of people, especially who are new to this, are starting to realize, this might be a bit easier on me and myself if I actually link up with people who have the same interests with me and see which ones I work with well together and stuff. Instead of, okay,
Yeah.
I have to do this, otherwise I'm not going to make it type of deal. Compared to just like, I'm here to have fun with this. I'm looking at something that's inspiring. And speaking of comic books, which we'll get to in a second, you being inspired by comics, what are some of your favorite comics and why?
Well, X-Men,
Mm-hmm.
how can you talk about being a comic fan without loving the X-Men? And I started reading comics in the late 70s. So, starting with X-Men, Giant Size #1, X-Men 64, uh, you know, that's just started a whole new thing. Anything John Byrne was doing when he jumped onto Fantastic Four, it became a whole new thing that just got better and better. Um, Spawn was a whole different look
Mm-hmm.
at it, and the detail that McFarlane put, like when he started on Spider-Man, it just was such a visual treat to look at. So kind of like a lot of things, I get different things out of different comics. A lot of black and white, Savage Sword of Conan. I love black and white art. That kind of illustration. The old John Buscema work there was just absolutely incredible, and again, great visual action,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it done without dialogue, without word balloons. And if you can tell a story without dialogue, that's great visual storytelling. So,
Nice.
these days I just pick up various different ones. It's not any one thing in particular, although I really do love Invincible.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up the big catalogs of those. The Walking Dead comics, again, black and white. Those have been absolutely incredible to look at too, which we actually use some of those in the shows. There's some really iconic moments in the comic book, and Rick said, want this to look like this panel from the comic book. So there are a lot of times we're pulling directly from the original source.
Nice. Nice. So you got comic books, you got all these forms of inspiration. And speaking of which, because
Yeah.
a lot of artists, the one thing that a lot of new people usually get focused on is voice actors, for instance, or I want to be in this versus I want to see what it is I can bring to this or what has inspired me to come up with an idea that I can then essentially give to this product. You mentioned inspiration. What are some of the things that artists in general who want to do, who want to participate in this field of work? Storyboard. What are some of the things that you think would be a good idea for them to actually do, whether it be mindset, training, or anything like that?
Well, you've got to be a great quick sketch artist, and you have to enjoy quick sketching. If all you want to do is sit around and do fine, tight, illustrated work, concept illustration is more for you rather than storyboarding. A lot of what we do does not look that great because we have to move so fast. It's still going to be accurate and it's going to tell a great story because that's why we're called a story artist, not just an illustrator, right? So we're telling stories. Sometimes the quality of the art takes a back seat to the demon of deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to get it done in time for production, then make use of them before they start shooting.
Right.
And for TV, the production schedule is so short. We often only have 4 days to illustrate the sequences that we need to do. We don't do the entire show. We
Mm-hmm.
do stunts, visual effects, fancy camera moves, things like that. Things that are and big visual effects. The things that are most needed that are the hardest to describe to crew people and the post production houses. So one of the things that inspires most of us as story artists are behind the scenes books that have storyboards in them. Like I recently picked, what's on my podium back here right now are the storyboards from King Kong and Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
God, they are absolutely stunning. They're gorgeous. It's great storytelling, but it's also incredible artwork. They had a huge schedule for doing the previs on it, so they had time to really illustrate. And oh, those are stunning. Or, and when I came up, there wasn't a whole lot of those, but all of us were buying the Making of Star Wars books.
Mm-hmm.
Those have a lot of great storyboards in them by Joe Johnston, a couple of the other big story artists at the time. And a lot of story artists end up moving into directing. A lot of us have done that. So, the behind the scenes books are a big thing. Most of us are comic book fans. We grew up reading them and we continue to read them. And then sharing stuff with each other online.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing what my friends are doing, and I love to share with them some of my latest stuff. Once a project is out and we can share it. We have to be careful about we can't show things before it airs. We got big contracts about that.
Yeah, definitely. Don't want a random lawsuit like, hey, did you share this?
Yep.
No. So speaking of directing, you've done directing, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
So what's your experience as a director when working with not just the actors but the whole crew? How do you essentially get things through to them so that everything works smoothly and efficiently?
Passion helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to follow someone who's passionate about what they're doing. Um, so I try to find something I really love about what I'm working on and really get into it. I tend to have high energy anyway, and a lot of directors do have high energy, kind of need to, because you're dealing with 10,000 things at a time, overlapping. You never have enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's amazing how many questions you're answering every single day. Working with directors, my wife started as a newscaster and did a lot of VO work. So she helped me a lot when I first started directing, because I started directing animation, then I got into live action as well. Um, and she was really helping me with ways to talk to actors, like, never give them a line reading unless it's a child.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes kids you need to give line readings to, but ways to approach things. And every actor is a little bit different. So you get to know them. And I have found at times talking through alone, not necessarily on set, but talking through with my actors on what a sequence is or what this project is or whatever, they'll often bring things I never thought of that just makes it so much better. So it's really great to get into a collaboration. And then there are times when you have a very specific idea in your head that you want everyone to get. And that's when you're a little more forceful on, okay, this is what we're going to go to, and I'd really like you to hit it this way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mix. There's no one way to approach any actor, no one way to approach any sequence. It just depends on what it's going to take to get the best visuals and who you're working with.
Nice.
Some actors are very hard to direct. Some you barely have to say anything to. It's like anybody you work with anywhere. Everyone is different with the way they approach it. So you have to kind of get to know who you're working with and do your best to work with them to pull out the best for everybody.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely agree. So when it comes to directing, what got you into directing as opposed to storyboard? You had storyboard down, you're like, all right, cool, I like this. And then direct, because it was interesting. While I'd studied to be an actor, I tried to hand at directing. I was like, wow, this is actually really fun. Not because I get a power, but because I now have a different way to approach working on a story. So how has that experience been for you? And like, what is that drew you to directing?
Wanting to tell stories my way. As a story artist, obviously I have a lot of influence on the directors and the productions that I'm working on, but there are times that you want it to be your vision, not always being the director's vision. And there are some stories that I just want to see told.
Mm-hmm.
So I owned an animation studio years and years ago, and we got into doing a lot of stuff, and I directed almost everything that we did at the studio, whether it was commercials or shorts or whatnot. Um, and that was just a blast. I actually got my start when I was art directing at Nickelodeon.
Oh, nice.
There are some second unit pieces that I would direct. Even on Sequest for Spielberg, I got to do some second unit direction on a sequence that I had done the breakdowns, and it was a different director. Spielberg produced it, but it was a different director, and the director said, look, the sequence better than I do, and gave me the crew. He went off one way, I went off the other, and so sometimes it just kind of happens. We're visual storytellers, as story artists.
Mm-hmm.
We're figuring out what shots and what makes something dynamic and most fun and tells the story the best. So it's, like Alfred Hitchcock
Mm.
started as a story artist. Jim Cameron started as a story artist. Joe Johnston, directed The Rocketeer and many other things, started as a story artist. So this happens a lot, and especially when you're talking about animation,
Mm-hmm.
the story artist is the visual director. When you see directed by, that's generally the voice actor director.
Mm-hmm.
But the story artist is actually breaking down all of the shots in animation, not in features, but in TV. So, we're directing anyway. So and everyone wants to tell their story their way. We're already proving we can do it because everything we do shows that we can do
Nice. Yeah, I did not know that actually. I'll keep that in mind. So that's really cool. Thank you. So we got directing. We talked about storyboards, comics, because there's a lot of great comics out there. What are some of the things you do to just really unwind from your work, or is what you do considered that thing that allows you to unwind?
Well, quite often when I'm not drawing on a gig, I'm drawing for myself. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like I get to draw in black and white every day, so life is pretty freaking great. Um, but I like to exercise. I like to play sports. So disc golf is a big. I'm a big fan of disc golf.
Nice.
It gets me outside, it gets me moving around, and it gets me twisting when you're throwing the discs.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an artist, we're hunched over all the time. Most of us have bad backs.
Mm-hmm.
But getting out disc golfing, it's hiking and twisting. I have stopped having bad backs since I started disc golfing. So it literally cured my bad back. My wife likes to play tennis, so I go play tennis with her, with my kids. So I love physical activity. I love working on my house. My studio is very customized.
I see that.
I've customized every room in my house, but I mean, I've got here in my studio, I've got hidden doorways, I've got rear projection on doors, I've got things hanging from the ceiling, I've got John McClane coming down from in one of the air vents. Uh, it's just fun stuff everywhere. Again, because I love designing and building, but it's also inspiring. Everything in my studio is to inspire me to be creative. So it's just, and I'm very purposeful with doing it, but it's also fun.
Yeah, it sounds fun. Like just John McClane. Like, hey, there's John McClane. Now I'm thinking about something that I could just write down for a story or do that involves someone going through an event, maybe getting stuck in it or something. That's awesome. So what I definitely hear you saying about disc golf is it's a cure for your back and
Yep.
probably could save you from the chiropractor and giving them a couple $1,000s.
Well, I go to my chiropractor anyway because that's maintenance, but it's keeping me out of pain.
Got it.
My back used to just seize on me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just not having that problem anymore. And it gets me out of the office, gives me something else to look forward to. And there's something about watching the flight of a well-thrown disc is just incredible. I'm a total geek over it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah. So that's a lot of fun. And I write books. I do a lot of things that are creative. I love just creating things. So I'm always up to something.
That's nice. That is awesome. So before we wrap up, there is one thing I want to
Yeah.
ask. Since you've worked with actors and clearly voice actors as well, from the looks of it,
Hmm.
what are some of the things that you would advise as a person who's literally in charge of a project or has been in charge of a project, either or, that newer people should probably consider, work on, and really put down as something that to help them out?
Well, these days you've got to have the ability to record good, clean sound at your own place. So it's better to invest in some good equipment than get schooling. Schooling generally doesn't help people very much. That said, independent courses are great for actors because that's where they get some practice and direct feedback. But like college is irrelevant for most people in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
In any field, it's in the industry, it's irrelevant. And I'm saying that as a person who has a degree, but I've never been asked if I have one. One thing that some actors, and particularly newer ones, don't know how to take a note.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, if you want give it to me in a different way, make it happier, make it sadder, whatever. They don't know how to do that because we'll get the same reading over and over and over. And it's a struggle sometimes with some actors without a lot of experience to give us a variety or even understand what makes something happy. So, as a director, it's something that my wife taught me. You want something to sound happier? Tell someone to smile when they say the line.
Mm-hmm.
It instantly changes the tone of your voice when you're smiling. I'll often tell an actor, even in a voice session, don't sit, stand up. I want you to do this. Do this while you're saying that. And I'll give them some physical direction, which I know will change their voice. Or I'll hammer on them, say, harder, and they'll do it. More, more. And I'm trying to get my own energy hyped up with them. And what happens is you get to a breakthrough point where you build someone up, and all of a sudden a dam bursts, and the most incredible thing comes out of them. That is so fun and exciting for everyone in the session to be able to do. In fact, years and years ago, when before Zoom, when Skype was still very new,
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the first directors in the industry to put a Skype camera into a voice booth when directing long distance.
Nice.
Post Magazine actually did a really big article on me about
Mm-hmm.
it because I was the one who was bringing cameras into New York audio booths because I was directing out of Orlando.
Right.
So what that did is allowed me to see my actors, to be able to give them some visual guidance, but it also allowed the actors to see my reaction because actors have that need and desire to see, am I pleasing the director? What are they thinking about this? And when you're sitting alone in a booth and you're just looking at a microphone, it can really get in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that, you can have more of this face-to-face interface. It becomes calmer, it becomes more fun, and you can really play off of each other a lot better when you can see the other person. And, virtual directing, which is happening more and more and more, but at the time it was it was almost brand new. We used to literally would phone it in. They would just tap a phone line in, and you would direct an actor. And I didn't like doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I had the engineers literally put their Mac in there because there was no other way at the time. No one was doing it. I
Mm-hmm.
just had them put their Mac in there so the actors and I could see each other. Instantly changed the dynamic and the energy of our recording sessions. It was amazing.
Yeah, I agree. You're completely reminding me of my first experience with a play when my director just looked at me. She's like, you're playing a judge who is yelling at people. Come on, I want more. And then that dam that you mentioned burst, and I was like, wow. I've never experienced that before. Like, my God,
Yeah.
it's amazing, and it's always great to see that happen. It's not like you mentioned, it's not like one of those things that, oh, it just happened once, it's not gonna happen again. It could happen God knows how many times at this point, and it's just that amazing every single time.
Yeah, and look, it's that camaraderie between the actor and the director. As the actor, you have to understand sometimes we're looking for that special thing and we won't know it until we hear it. Or other times we know where we can push you and we're going to keep pushing to get that magic. So it might frustrate you while you're doing it, but you're going to be as happy as everyone else when we get to that point of, oh my God, that was absolutely amazing.
Definitely. And it's almost like it's worth it too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. It's the way my mentor had explained it, it's like it's a high that you'll never experience anywhere else or any way else than by actually doing this and going step by step for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. So as we wrap up, where can people find you and your work?
Uh, Really, it's LinkedIn. That's the
Mm-hmm.
only place I post things. I actually land a lot of jobs through LinkedIn. And because I stay so busy, I don't do social media. I'm not interested in fans as much as I am people I can talk back and forth with and connect with.
Right.
So just look up Mark Simon Artist or just Mark Simon. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. And that's where I post everything every day.
Awesome. Sounds good. Mark, thank you for coming on the podcast stuff. It was awesome hearing this too, and then really getting to talk to somebody about like what inspires you for this artistic endeavor. It's like this and this things. I was like, yeah, this is time well worth spent. Thank you.
Awesome. This was fun, man. It was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I definitely will see you on LinkedIn, and I'm gonna just start looking up one of the things you're working on now, so I can watch more of it.
Cool. All right. See you
Awesome.
on the other side.
Have a good day.